The cabin was freezing, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and won't let go, but that wasn't what made the passengers stare. It was the sight of Victoria Vance, billionaire CEO, ice queen of the corporate world, shaking like a frightened child in her first-class seat. Across the aisle, a man in worn jeans held his sleeping daughter close under a faded military blanket. He didn't know her. She didn't know him. But in 6 hours, that blanket would expose secrets, shatter reputations, and prove that sometimes the coldest nights reveal the warmest hearts. If you're watching from somewhere in this world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The overhead lights in the cabin had been dimmed an hour ago, but Ethan Cole hadn't closed his eyes once. He sat in seat 23C, the worn fabric rough against his back, one arm wrapped protectively around Lily as she slept against his chest. Her small fingers clutched the edge of the blanket, the same green military-issue wool he'd carried through 3 deployments, 2 continents, and more nights than he cared to count. It smelled faintly of storage and detergent, but to him, it still carried the weight of everything he'd left behind. The plane shuddered slightly as it cut through turbulence somewhere over the Atlantic. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Lily stirred, her breath warm against his shirt, and he pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. "Daddy?" she mumbled, half asleep. "I'm right here, sweetheart." She settled back down without opening her eyes. Ethan let out a slow breath and glanced out the window. Nothing but darkness and the blinking red light on the wing. They were flying to New York, a last-ditch effort to start over after the bank took the house. He had $1,700 in his checking account, a duffel bag in the overhead compartment, and a phone full of unanswered job applications. But he had Lily, and as long as he had her, he'd figure the rest out. Across the aisle, someone coughed. Ethan glanced over and saw her for the first time. She was sitting in 23A, the window seat directly across from him. First class was only a thin curtain away, but she wasn't in first class. That struck him as odd, because everything else about her screamed money. The tailored black coat draped over her lap, the thin silver watch on her wrist that probably cost more than his truck, the way she sat, back straight, chin up, like she was posing for a portrait even at 30,000 feet. But her hands were shaking. She had them folded tightly in her lap, fingers laced together so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her breath came in short, shallow pulls, and every few seconds her shoulders would tremble just enough to notice. She was freezing. Ethan frowned. The cabin was cold, colder than it should have been, but not cold enough to explain what he was seeing. She wasn't just uncomfortable. She looked like she was fighting to stay conscious. A flight attendant walked past, her smile polite and automatic. The woman in 23A lifted her hand slightly, almost like she wanted to say something, but then lowered it again. The attendant didn't notice, or didn't care. Ethan looked away. Not his problem. Lily shifted again, burrowing deeper into the blanket. She was warm, safe. That's all that mattered. But then the woman coughed again, wet and rattling, and Ethan's eyes flicked back to her before he could stop himself. Her face was pale, too pale, and her lips had taken on a faint bluish tint. He recognized that look. He'd seen it before, in the mountains outside Kandahar, when temperatures dropped below freezing and the body started shutting down to protect the core. She's hypothermic. The thought landed hard and fast, and with it came a flood of old instincts he thought he'd buried. His hand twitched toward the call button, then stopped. Not your mission, Cole, not anymore. He forced himself to look away again, focusing on Lily's soft breathing, the rise and fall of her small chest. She was all that mattered. The rest of the world could handle itself. Behind him, someone laughed. Ethan turned his head slightly and saw 2 men in the row behind the woman. Mid-30s, business casual, the kind of guys who traveled for work and acted like they owned the plane. One of them was leaning forward, whispering to his buddy while looking directly at the woman in 23A. "He probably spent all her money on that coat and couldn't afford a blanket," the first one said, just loud enough to carry. His friend snickered. "Or maybe she's too good to ask for one." The woman didn't react. She kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight, but Ethan saw the way her fingers pressed harder together. "Hey," the first guy called out, louder now. "You okay over there, princess? You look a little cold." More laughter rippled through the rows nearby. A woman 2 seats up turned to look, her expression caught between pity and amusement. The woman in 23A still didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, shaking. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He knew that look too, the stubborn refusal to show weakness, the desperate hope that if you just stayed quiet long enough, people would stop looking. Lily stirred again, and this time her eyes opened, sleepy and unfocused. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Shh, go back to sleep, kiddo." But Lily wasn't looking at him. She was looking across the aisle, her small face creased with concern. "That lady's cold," she said softly. "I know. Really cold," Ethan sighed. "Yeah, Lil, I know." Lily sat up a little, rubbing her eyes. "We should share." "What?" "Our blanket. We should share it with her." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked down at his daughter, 6 years old, messy brown hair, eyes too big for her face, and saw the same thing he always saw. A goodness he didn't deserve, a heart that hadn't learned to protect itself yet. "Lily, we need the blanket." "We have each other," she said simply. "She doesn't have anybody." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Because she was right. The woman across the aisle was alone, shaking, suffering in silence while strangers laughed at her. And Lily had noticed. He looked at the blanket in his hands, worn thin in places, frayed at the edges. It had kept him alive through frozen nights when nothing else would. It had covered Lily through every nightmare, every fever, every time the world felt too big and too cold, and now his daughter wanted to give it away. "Lily, please, Daddy." Her voice was so small, so sure. Ethan closed his eyes and felt the weight of every choice that had led him here. The job he'd lost, the house he couldn't save, the life he couldn't give her, but he could give her this. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." He stood slowly, carefully folding the blanket in his hands. The cabin felt even colder without it. Lily watched him with wide, hopeful eyes. Ethan stepped across the narrow aisle and stopped beside the woman's seat. She didn't look up at first. Her eyes were fixed on the seat back in front of her, her whole body locked in place like she was afraid to move. "Ma'am?" Ethan said softly. She flinched slightly, then turned her head. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that went deeper than a single sleepless night. Her eyes were sharp and guarded, but there was something fragile underneath. "I'm sorry to bother you," Ethan continued, "but my daughter noticed you were cold. We thought maybe you could use this." He held out the blanket. The woman stared at it like it was a foreign object. Her gaze flicked from the blanket to Ethan's face, then over to Lily, who was watching from across the aisle with an encouraging smile. "I don't—" The woman's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I don't need charity." Her tone was clipped, defensive, but her hands were still shaking. "It's not charity," Ethan said. "It's just a blanket. I'm fine." "You're not." The words came out harder than he'd intended, and he saw her stiffen, but he didn't take them back. He'd seen too many people say they were fine when they weren't. Too many soldiers who refused help until it was too late. "Look," he said, softer this time. "I'm not trying to embarrass you, but you're freezing, and we have a blanket we're not using. That's it. No strings." The woman's jaw worked silently. For a moment, Ethan thought she was going to refuse again. But then her eyes drifted past him to Lily, still watching with that wide, hopeful expression. Something in the woman's face cracked. "Okay," she whispered. Ethan draped the blanket over her lap, and she pulled it up around her shoulders with trembling hands. The relief on her face was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. "Thank you," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. Ethan nodded and turned to head back to his seat. That's when the whispers started. "Did you see that? Is he seriously giving her his blanket? Who does that on a plane?" Ethan kept walking, but he could feel the eyes on him, the judgment, the confusion. He slid back into his seat and pulled Lily close, trying to ignore the murmurs spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Lily didn't notice she was smiling, her small hand patting his arm. "You did a good thing, Daddy." Ethan didn't answer. He just held her tighter and tried not to think about how cold the cabin had gotten. Across the aisle, the woman wrapped herself in the blanket and closed her eyes. For the first time since takeoff, her hands stopped shaking, but the whispers didn't stop. 20 minutes later, the man in the row behind her leaned forward again. "Hey," he called out, his voice dripping with mock concern. "How's the charity blanket working out for you?" His friend laughed. "Yeah, does it come with a side of dignity, or is that extra?" A few scattered chuckles echoed through the cabin. The woman kept her eyes closed, but Ethan saw the way her shoulders tensed under the blanket. The first guy wasn't done. "You know what's funny? She's probably got more money than everyone on this plane combined, and she's sitting there wrapped in some dude's hand-me-down like a homeless person." More laughter, louder this time. Ethan's hands curled into fists. "Daddy?" Lily whispered, her smile fading. "It's okay," he said through gritted teeth. "Ignore them." But the guy behind them wasn't interested in being ignored. He pulled out his phone, held it up, and snapped a picture. The flash lit up the dim cabin. The woman's eyes flew open, and she turned sharply, her face stricken. "Did you just—" she started, but her voice was too weak to carry. The guy grinned and tapped his screen. "Just posting this to Twitter. Ice Queen CEO freezing on a budget flight begging for blankets. This is going to go viral." His friend cackled. "Dude, that's brutal." Ethan was halfway out of his seat before he even realized he was moving. "Delete it," he said, his voice low and hard. The guy looked up, still grinning. "Excuse me?" "The photo, delete it." The grin faltered. "Relax, man, it's just a joke." "I don't care. Delete it." The cabin had gone quiet now. Every head within 3 rows had turned to watch. The guy's expression darkened. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Someone who's asking you nicely to delete that photo before I stop asking nicely." The two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, the guy scoffed and lowered his phone. "Whatever, dude. Not worth it." But Ethan could see the screen. He hadn't deleted anything. He'd just minimized the app. Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could say anything else, a flight attendant appeared beside him, her smile strained. "Sir, is there a problem here?" "No problem," the guy said quickly, holding up his hands. "Just having a conversation?" The attendant's eyes flicked to Ethan, and there was something in her expression that said, "Don't make this worse." Ethan forced himself to sit back down. Lily was staring at him with wide eyes, and he realized his hands were still clenched into fists. He made himself relax, one finger at a time. "It's okay," he whispered to her. "Everything's okay." But it wasn't. Across the aisle, the woman had pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her face turned toward the window. She looked smaller now, fragile, and Ethan knew, with a sinking certainty, that whatever the guy had just posted was already spreading. An hour passed, then another. The cabin stayed cold. The whispers didn't stop. Ethan could hear fragments of conversations around him. Speculation, judgment, cruel little jokes that people thought were too quiet to carry. He tried to block it out, but Lily kept shifting beside him, uncomfortable without the blanket, and every time she shivered, his chest tightened a little more. Across the aisle, the woman hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, staring out the window at the darkness beyond. The blanket was pulled up to her chin, but Ethan could still see the tension in her shoulders. The shame. He looked away, hating himself for caring. Then, without warning, the woman spoke. "Excuse me." Her voice was so soft he almost didn't hear it. Ethan turned his head. She was looking at him now, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this is inappropriate, but would it be possible—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Could I sit with you? Just for a little while? I can't get warm." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. She wasn't asking for the blanket back, she was asking to share it, to sit close enough that the body heat would matter. It was a desperate request, the kind of thing people only asked when they'd run out of pride. Lily tugged on his sleeve. "She needs help, Daddy," she whispered. Ethan looked at his daughter, then back at the woman across the aisle. Her face was pale and drawn, and her hands were shaking again despite the blanket. He thought about the soldiers he'd served with, the ones who'd been too stubborn to ask for help until it was too late, the ones who'd died quietly because they didn't want to be a burden. He thought about the life he'd lost, the mistakes he'd made, the man he used to be. And then he thought about the man Lily believed he was. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, you can sit with us." The woman's eyes widened, just slightly, like she couldn't believe he'd said yes. She stood on unsteady legs, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, and crossed the aisle. Ethan shifted closer to the window, pulling Lily onto his lap to make room. The woman sank into the seat beside him, and he draped the blanket over all three of them. The cabin erupted. "Are you kidding me? Is this really happening? Someone needs to record this." Ethan ignored them. He kept his arm around Lily and his eyes forward, refusing to give the crowd what they wanted. Beside him, the woman was so still she might as well have been made of glass. But slowly, so slowly, her shaking began to ease. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to speak. Lily, though, had no such hesitation. She twisted in his lap and looked up at the woman with bright, curious eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. The woman blinked, startled. "Victoria." "I'm Lily, and that's my dad. His name's Ethan." Victoria's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "It's nice to meet you, Lily. Are you feeling better?" "A little?" "Good." Lily settled back against Ethan's chest, satisfied. "We'll keep you warm." And just like that, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, the tension eased. Victoria sat quietly beside them, her breathing evening out, her hands finally still. The blanket stretched across all three of them, thin and worn, but somehow enough. The whispers continued, the phone stayed out. But under that blanket, in the cold, dark cabin, three strangers found something the rest of the world had forgotten: warmth. For the first time in 3 hours, Victoria Vance felt her fingers again. The sensation came back slowly, pins and needles at first, then a dull ache that meant blood was flowing properly. She flexed them carefully under the blanket, not wanting to draw attention to the movement. The warmth radiating from the man beside her and the small child on his lap was modest, almost fragile, but it was enough. Her core temperature was stabilizing. The panic that had been clawing at her chest since boarding was finally loosening its grip. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt shame so thick it was hard to breathe. Victoria Vance did not ask for help. She didn't sit in economy. She didn't huddle under strangers' blankets like some desperate, pathetic... She stopped the thought before it could finish. That kind of thinking was what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. Beside her, the child, Lily, had fallen back asleep, her small body curled against her father's chest. The man, Ethan, sat perfectly still, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. He hadn't said a word since she'd sat down, hadn't looked at her, hadn't asked for anything. He'd just made room. Victoria studied him from the corner of her eye. Mid-30s, maybe? Lean in the way that came from work, not Jim's. His hands were calloused. She'd noticed when he'd handed her the blanket. His clothes were clean but worn, jeans that had seen better years, a flannel shirt with a small tear near the collar. The kind of man who worked with his hands and didn't complain about it. The kind of man she'd spent her entire career not noticing. "I'm sorry about the photo," she said quietly. Ethan's eyes shifted toward her, then away. "Not your fault." "Still, that was meant for me. You didn't need to get involved." "Already was involved." His tone was flat, matter-of-fact. Not cold exactly, but not warm either. Like he'd already decided this conversation wasn't worth the energy. Victoria felt a spark of irritation cut through the shame. "I'm trying to thank you." "You already did." "I'm trying to do it properly." Ethan finally turned to look at her, and Victoria was struck by the tiredness in his face. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was something deeper. The kind of weariness that came from carrying weight no one else could see. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "We shared a blanket. That's it." "That's not..." Victoria stopped herself, realizing her voice had risen. A few heads turned in their direction. She lowered her tone. "That's not nothing, not to me." Ethan studied her for a long moment, and Victoria had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen in a way she wasn't used to, not assessed for her value or her utility, but simply observed. "Why were you so cold?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "You weren't just uncomfortable. You were hypothermic. On a commercial flight. That doesn't just happen." Victoria's throat tightened. She could brush him off, should brush him off. This man was a stranger, and her medical history was none of his business. But something about the directness of his question, the lack of judgment in it, made her answer honestly. "I have a condition," she said carefully. "It affects my circulation. My body doesn't regulate temperature well. Usually it's manageable, but the cabin temperature dropped, and I didn't. She trailed off, hating how weak the explanation sounded. You didn't bring a backup plan, Ethan finished. I didn't think I'd need one. I was supposed to be in first class. They have blankets, climate control. I had it handled. So what happened? Victoria's jaw tightened. I gave my seat to someone who needed it more. She saw the surprise flicker across Ethan's face before he could hide it. He opened his mouth, closed it, then seemed to recalibrate. That was decent of you, he said finally. It was stupid of me, Victoria corrected. I should have planned better, should have anticipated. She stopped, realizing she was talking more to herself than to him. I'm not good at asking for help. Yeah, Ethan said dryly. I noticed. Despite everything, Victoria felt her lips twitch, almost a smile. I'm told it's one of my more charming qualities. Right up there with the warm personality? This time she did smile, just barely. That's what the board says. They fell into silence again, but it felt different now, less hostile, less brittle. Lily shifted in Ethan's lap, mumbling something inaudible. He adjusted his arm around her automatically, the gesture so practiced it was clearly muscle memory. She's sweet, Victoria said softly. She's the best thing I ever did. Ethan's voice carried a weight that made Victoria look at him more closely. Just the two of you? He nodded once. Her mom left when she was 2. Decided being a parent wasn't what she signed up for. I'm sorry. Don't be. We're better off. There was no bitterness in his voice, just fact. But Victoria heard what he wasn't saying. The nights alone, the double shifts, the constant fear of not being enough. She knew that fear, just from a different angle. What brings you to New York? She asked. Ethan's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. Work. Maybe. If I can find it. What do you do? Security, mostly. Installation, maintenance, consulting, whatever pays. You have interviews lined up? A few leads. Nothing solid. Victoria nodded, filing the information away without really knowing why. And Lily? You're bringing her with you? Don't have anyone else to leave her with. My sister lives in Brooklyn. She's letting us crash with her until I get on my feet. It's temporary. How temporary? Ethan's expression hardened slightly. As temporary as I can make it. I don't take charity. The words landed like a mirror, and Victoria realized he'd just thrown her own attitude back at her. She should have been offended. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to respect. Behind them, someone coughed loudly, and Victoria heard the familiar whisper of gossip starting up again. Still can't believe she's sitting with them. Probably doing it for the optics, damage control for when that photo goes viral. Victoria's shoulders tensed. She'd spent years learning to ignore public opinion, to let criticism roll off her like water. But something about being trapped at 30,000 feet, wrapped in a stranger's blanket while people mocked her, made it harder to maintain the armor. Ethan must have noticed because his voice cut through her thoughts. You get used to it, he said quietly. Used to what? People talking like you're not there, like you don't matter. Victoria looked at him sharply. That happens to you? All the time. When you're the guy installing security cameras, fixing locks, cleaning up after people, you're invisible. People say things around you they'd never say to your face. You learn to tune it out. I don't think I can tune this out. You will, or you won't. Either way, it doesn't change anything. Victoria wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because he was right. The whispers didn't change the fact that she was warm now. That her fingers worked. That she wasn't alone under this blanket. The plane shuddered through another patch of turbulence, and Lily woke with a small gasp. It's okay, Ethan murmured immediately. Just bumps. We're fine. Lily blinked groggily, then seemed to register that Victoria was still there. Her face brightened. You're still here. I am, Victoria said, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. Are you warm enough? Yes, thank you. Good. Lily yawned and snuggled back against her father. Daddy, I'm hungry. Ethan grimaced. I know, kiddo, we'll get something when we land. But that's forever from now. It's 2 more hours. That's forever! Ethan pulled a slightly crushed granola bar from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Here, make it last. Lily took it with both hands like it was treasure and immediately bit off half of it. Small bites, Lil. I am taking small bites. That was half the bar. That's small for me. Despite herself, Victoria laughed, quietly but genuinely. Both Ethan and Lily turned to look at her in surprise. Sorry, Victoria said quickly. She reminds me of myself at that age. You talked back to your dad? Ethan asked, one eyebrow raised. Constantly. Drove him crazy. The memory surfaced before she could stop it. Her father's office, late at night, his exasperated expression as she argued about bedtime. The warmth of those moments felt impossibly distant now. Lily was watching her with open curiosity. Do you have kids? No, Victoria said. I don't. Why not? Lily, Ethan warned. What? I'm just asking. It's okay, Victoria said. I never made time for it. I was always working. That's sad, Lily said with the blunt honesty only children could pull off. Victoria felt the words hit harder than they should have. Yeah, she said softly. I suppose it is. Lily seemed to think about this for a moment, then held out what remained of her granola bar. You can have some if you want. Victoria stared at the offering, a child's half-eaten snack extended with complete sincerity. That's very kind, she managed. But you should eat it. We're sharing the blanket. We can share food too. Ethan looked like he wanted to intervene, but Victoria spoke first. You're right, she said. We can. She took the smallest piece she could manage and ate it. It tasted like oats and honey, and something she couldn't quite name. Generosity, maybe. Lily beamed and finished the rest in 2 bites. The plane's PA system crackled to life, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. Folks, we're going to be experiencing some rough air for the next 20 to 30 minutes. Flight attendants, please take your seats. The seatbelt sign dinged on, and the cabin lights flickered. Lily pressed closer to Ethan. I don't like the bumpy parts. I know, but we're safe, I promise. How do you know? Because I used to jump out of planes for a living, and if there was something to worry about, I'd tell you. Victoria's head turned sharply. You were a paratrooper? Ethan shrugged. Among other things. That's not... Victoria stopped herself. That's not a small thing. It was a long time ago. How long? Long enough. The evasion was clear, and Victoria recognized it for what it was. A door being closed. She'd done it herself 1,000 times. Still, something about the way he'd said it made her want to know more. The turbulence hit hard, and the plane dropped what felt like 50 feet in an instant. Several passengers gasped. Someone's bag fell from an overhead compartment with a heavy thud. Lily squeaked and buried her face in Ethan's chest. You're okay, he said calmly. Just air pockets. The plane's designed for this. I don't like it. I know. But being scared doesn't change anything, so we breathe through it. He demonstrated, taking slow, deliberate breaths. Lily copied him, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with his. Victoria watched them, something tight forming in her chest. The way he held his daughter, protective but not smothering. The way he acknowledged her fear without dismissing it. The quiet competence in every movement. This man had nothing. No money, no security, no safety net. And yet he was teaching his daughter how to be brave. When was the last time Victoria had been brave? The turbulence continued, the plane bucking and shaking like a living thing. Around them, passengers were gripping armrests, murmuring prayers, checking their seatbelts. But under the blanket, the 3 of them sat still. Warm. Together. And for reasons Victoria couldn't fully explain, that felt like the safest place in the world. The rough air finally subsided after what felt like an eternity. The cabin settled back into its usual hum, and passengers began to relax, releasing white-knuckled grips on armrests. Lily had fallen asleep again, her breathing soft and even against Ethan's shirt. He hadn't moved once during the turbulence, Victoria realized. Hadn't flinched, hadn't tensed, just sat there like a stone, steady and immovable. You weren't scared at all, she said quietly. Wasn't about me being scared, it was about her not being scared. You hide it well. Practice. Victoria wanted to ask what kind of practice taught a man to become that still, that controlled, but the set of his jaw told her the conversation was over. A flight attendant made her way down the aisle, checking on passengers. When she reached their row, her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the three of them sharing the blanket, but she recovered quickly. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her professional smile firmly in place. "We're fine," Ethan said. The attendant's gaze shifted to Victoria, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or judgment. "Ma'am, would you like me to find you a seat elsewhere? I'm sure we can arrange—" "No," Victoria said sharply. Then, softer, "Thank you, but I'm fine where I am." The attendant hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. "If you're certain—" "I am." The woman nodded and moved on, but Victoria caught the look she exchanged with another attendant farther up the aisle. More whispers, more speculation. "This is going to follow you," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "Probably." "You're not worried?" Victoria considered the question. 24 hours ago, the answer would have been an immediate yes. Her reputation was everything. The carefully constructed image of Victoria Vance, untouchable, unflappable, always in control. This would shatter that image completely. But right now, wrapped in a stranger's blanket, still feeling the ghost of hypothermia in her bones, she found she didn't care as much as she should. "I'm too tired to worry," she admitted. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a while. Victoria felt her eyes growing heavy, the warmth and exhaustion finally catching up with her. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. The board meeting in London had run late. Then there'd been the emergency call about the Singapore office. Then the mad dash to Heathrow to catch this flight, because it was the only one that would get her to New York in time for tomorrow's investor meeting. She'd given her first-class seat to a young mother with twins who'd been bumped from an earlier flight. The woman had looked so desperate, so overwhelmed, that Victoria hadn't even thought twice. Just handed over the ticket and took the economy seat the gate agent had scrambled to find. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time. Now, shivering under a borrowed blanket, listening to the breathing of a sleeping child, Victoria wondered if it had been the first honest thing she had done in years. "Why security?" she asked suddenly. Ethan glanced at her. "What?" "You said you do security work. Why that specifically?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria thought he might not answer, but then he spoke, his voice low. "Because I'm good at it, and because it's something I can do without—" He trailed off. "Without what?" "Without anyone getting hurt." The weight in those words made Victoria pause. She heard what he wasn't saying, that there'd been a time when people did get hurt, when he was the one doing the hurting, probably. "How long were you in?" she asked gently. 12 years. "That's a long time. Long enough to forget how to be anything else. But you got out. Didn't have a choice. Medical discharge." He said it flatly, like he was reading from a report. Victoria wanted to ask what had happened, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she asked, "Do you miss it?" Ethan looked down at Lily, his hand resting on her back, feeling the rise and fall of her breathing. "I miss the clarity," he said finally. "The mission was always clear. You knew what you were supposed to do, who you were supposed to protect. Out here, it's all messier." "I know what you mean." He raised an eyebrow. "You do?" "In business, at least you have metrics, numbers, clear objectives. But the human part—" Victoria stopped, realizing she was revealing more than she'd intended. "Let's just say I'm better with spreadsheets than people." "Could have fooled me. You're doing fine right now." "This doesn't count. This is survival." "That's when people show who they really are." Victoria met his eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or just the recognition that they were both people who'd spent a long time pretending to be something they weren't. A phone chimed somewhere nearby, then another, and another. Ethan frowned and pulled out his phone, the screen casting a pale glow across his face. Victoria watched his expression change. Confusion, then concern, then something close to anger. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer, just turned the phone so she could see. It was Twitter. The photo from earlier had been posted, and it was everywhere. But it wasn't just one photo anymore. Someone had gotten a shot of Victoria sitting with Ethan and Lily under the blanket. Another showed her sleeping, her head tilted slightly toward Ethan's shoulder. A third captured the moment Lily had offered her the granola bar. The captions were brutal. Ice Queen melts. Victoria Vance caught slumming it in economy CEO worth $2 billion. Begs stranger for blanket on budget flight from boardroom to broke. Vance's fall from grace. And worse, so much worse, were the comments. Pathetic. She'd rather freeze than pay for first class? This is what happens when you pretend to be human PR stunt. Has to be. No way she's actually this desperate. Victoria felt her stomach drop. Her phone was in her bag, deliberately turned off because she'd wanted just a few hours without emails, without demands, without the constant pressure of being Victoria Vance. She'd gotten her wish, and now it was destroying her. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. Victoria shook her head, unable to speak. The shame from earlier was back, but worse now. Because it wasn't just the people on this plane anymore. It was the entire world. Her phone was still off, tucked away in her bag, but she could imagine the messages piling up. Her assistant, frantic. The PR team, scrambling. The board members, demanding explanations. And all because she'd been cold. All because she'd accepted help. "Miss Vance?" Victoria looked up. A man was standing in the aisle. Older, late 60s maybe, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of military service. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Yes?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is William Torres. I'm a retired brigadier general, and I wanted to—" He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I wanted to apologize for the behavior of my fellow passengers. This is disgraceful." Victoria blinked. That's kind of you, but it's not kind. It's necessary." Torres's voice carried authority, even in its quietness. "I've spent 40 years in service, and one thing I learned is that character shows in crisis. What I've seen tonight—" He shook his head. "These people should be ashamed." "General," Ethan said, his voice tight. "We're fine. Really." Torres turned to him, and something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying Ethan's face. "Have we met, son?" "No, sir." "You sure? You look familiar." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm sure." But Torres wasn't convinced. Victoria could see him processing, fitting pieces together. His gaze dropped to Ethan's hands, then back to his face. "You served," Torres said. It wasn't a question. "A long time ago." "What unit?" "That's—" Ethan stopped, clearly not wanting to continue this conversation. "That's not relevant. Humor me." The two men stared at each other, and Victoria felt the temperature in the air shift. Something was happening here, something she didn't understand. Finally, reluctantly, Ethan spoke. 75th Ranger Regiment, 3rd Battalion. Torres went very still. Then his expression changed completely. Surprise, recognition, and something that looked like respect. "Cole?" he said slowly. "Ethan Cole." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Yes, sir." "I'll be damned. I thought I recognized you." Torres turned to the nearby passengers, raising his voice. "Do you people have any idea who you've been mocking for the past 3 hours?" The cabin went quiet. Victoria felt Ethan tense beside her, but Torres wasn't finished. "This man," he said, pointing at Ethan, "is a decorated combat veteran. Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart. He saved 17 lives during the Kandahar offensive. 17 men who went home to their families because Sergeant Cole carried them out of a kill zone under heavy fire." The silence deepened. Victoria turned to stare at Ethan, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. His jaw was locked, his whole body rigid. "General," he said quietly, "please don't." "Don't what? Tell the truth?" Torres's voice softened slightly. "These people have been treating you like you're nobody. They should know better." "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Someone in the back of the cabin started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined. Within seconds, the applause spread through the rows. Ethan's face had gone pale. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Lily stirred, woken by the noise. "Daddy? What's happening?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Lily was looking around at all the people clapping, confusion written across her small face. Why are they clapping? Because your father is a hero, Torres said gently. I know that, Lily said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. But why are they clapping now? The simplicity of the question seemed to break something in the cabin. A few people laughed. Not cruel laughter this time, but something embarrassed and ashamed. The man who'd taken the photo stood up, his face red. I deleted it, he said, holding up his phone. The post. Everything. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. His voice cracked. I'm really sorry. Others began speaking up, apologizing, their voices overlapping in a chorus of regret that felt both genuine and completely inadequate. Ethan said nothing, just held his daughter and stared at the seat in front of him. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. She'd spent the last 3 hours being humiliated, mocked, reduced to a punchline. But Ethan had endured it silently, protecting her, protecting his daughter, never once mentioning that he was someone who'd earned respect, never once using his past to make himself seem bigger. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what she'd missed before. The scars on his knuckles, the slight hitch in the way he moved his left shoulder, the careful control in every gesture that spoke of training so deep it had become instinct. This man had saved lives, had put himself between danger and people who needed protecting, and now he was doing it again, just in a different way. Torres seemed to sense that Ethan needed the attention to end. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, and returned to his seat. The applause died down. The cabin settled back into uneasy quiet. But everything had changed. Victoria felt it in the way people stopped whispering, in the way they averted their eyes when they looked toward row 23. The mockery had transformed into something else. Shame, maybe, or just the uncomfortable realization that they'd misjudged badly. Lily had fallen back asleep, apparently unbothered by the revelation that her father was a hero. She already knew that. Ethan still hadn't moved. Why didn't you say something? Victoria asked quietly. About what? About who you are. What you've done. Doesn't change anything. It changes everything. No, Ethan said, finally looking at her. It doesn't. I'm still the same guy who needed a job. Still broke. Still trying to figure out how to take care of my kid. A medal doesn't pay rent. The bitterness in his voice was subtle, but it was there. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. Because he was right. The applause, the apologies, the sudden respect, none of it would matter when the plane landed. He'd still be scrambling for work, still sleeping on his sister's couch, still alone. I could help, she said suddenly. Ethan's expression hardened. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's, yes, it is. And I already told you, I don't take it. Even if it could change things for Lily? The words landed like a slap. Ethan's eyes flashed with something sharp and angry. Don't, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Don't use my daughter to make me feel like I owe you something. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? They stared at each other, the tension crackling between them. The blanket suddenly felt too small, too intimate. Victoria realized she'd crossed a line. Whatever fragile understanding they'd built over the past few hours, she'd just damaged it. I'm sorry, she said. You're right. That was out of line. Ethan's jaw worked silently. Then he nodded once, accepting the apology but not letting it go completely. They sat in silence as the plane continued its journey through the dark. Below them, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, black and cold. Above them, nothing but stars and the thin shell of metal keeping them alive. Victoria closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was racing, fitting pieces together, understanding things she'd been too cold and too desperate to see before. This man beside her had saved 17 lives, had earned medals and respect, and the kind of honor most people only read about. And he'd ended up here, broke, alone, starting over. How? Why? What kind of world let heroes fall through the cracks? The same world that had made Victoria Vance a billionaire for being ruthless and smart and willing to do whatever it took to win. The same world that rewarded her for closing factories and cutting jobs and maximizing shareholder value. She'd built an empire on efficiency, and she'd never once thought about the cost. Until tonight, until she'd been the one who was cold, desperate, and invisible. Until a man with nothing had given her everything he had. The plane's engines hummed steadily, carrying them toward New York, toward whatever came next. Under the worn military blanket, 3 people sat together in the dark, and for the first time in a very long time, Victoria Vance understood what it meant to be human. The silence between them stretched until Victoria couldn't stand it anymore. "I meant what I said," she began carefully. "About helping. Not because you owe me anything, but because you feel guilty," Ethan finished. His voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired. "I get it, but guilt doesn't change anything either." "That's not why." "Then why?" Victoria didn't have a good answer. Or rather, she had too many answers and none of them felt adequate. Because he'd helped her when no one else would. Because his daughter had seen her suffering and done something about it. Because for 3 hours, she'd been treated like a human being instead of a balance sheet, and she wanted to return the favor. But all of those reasons sounded hollow when she tried to put them into words. "I don't know," she admitted. "I just know that I want to." Ethan studied her face in the dim light. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "Do you?" He shifted slightly, careful not to wake Lily. "You know I'm broke. You know I'm desperate enough to drag my kid across the country on a maybe. You know I was a soldier once, which apparently makes me worth respecting now, even though 5 minutes ago I was just the idiot giving away his blanket. That's not fair. Isn't it?" Ethan's voice was quiet but sharp. "You saw it happen. The second Torres said my name, everything changed. Suddenly, I'm a hero. Suddenly, people care. But I'm the same person I was before he opened his mouth." Victoria wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. She'd seen the shift, felt it herself. The way her perception of him had changed when she learned about the medals, the lives saved, the sacrifices made. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "Being recognized?" "It bothers me that it matters." Ethan looked down at Lily, his expression softening. "I did my job. Other guys did more and got less. Some of them didn't come home at all. But I'm the one people want to put on a pedestal because some general remembered my name. You saved 17 lives. I was doing what I was trained to do, what I was ordered to do. You could have left them." "No," Ethan said flatly. "I couldn't have." The certainty in his voice made Victoria pause. This wasn't modesty or false humility. It was something deeper. A fundamental inability to be anything other than what he was. "That's why you gave me the blanket," she said slowly, understanding clicking into place. "Not because Lily asked. Because you couldn't leave someone suffering, even a stranger." Ethan's jaw tightened. Lily asked. That's the only reason that matters. But Victoria heard what he wasn't saying, that his daughter had learned that compassion from somewhere, that she'd grown up watching her father help people, even when it cost him, especially when it cost him. The plane hit another pocket of rough air, and the seatbelt sign dinged on again. Around them, passengers shifted nervously, but the turbulence was mild this time. Just enough to remind everyone they were suspended in a metal tube 5 miles above the ocean. Lily stirred, but didn't wake. Her small hand was curled against Ethan's shirt, holding on even in sleep. Victoria felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been longing. When was the last time someone had held on to her like that? Like she was safety itself? Her phone was still off in her bag, but she could imagine the chaos waiting for her when she turned it back on. Melissa, her assistant, would be having a breakdown. The PR team would have drafted 17 different responses by now. The board would be demanding a conference call. And somewhere in Connecticut, in the house she barely lived in, her father would have seen the photos by now, would have read the comments, the cruel jokes, the speculation about whether his daughter was finally cracking under the pressure. She wondered what he'd think, whether he'd be disappointed or just unsurprised. Robert Vance had built his company from nothing, turned it into an empire worth billions. He'd taught Victoria everything she knew about business, about winning, about never showing weakness. He'd also taught her that success required sacrifice, that you couldn't be soft and be successful, that compassion was a luxury leaders couldn't afford. For 38 years she'd believed him, but sitting here, wrapped in a blanket that probably cost less than her shoes, Victoria wondered if her father had been wrong, or if she'd just misunderstood what he was trying to teach her. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Ethan glanced at her. "Go ahead." Oh, when you got out, when you were discharged, did anyone help you? He was quiet for a long moment. There were programs, VA benefits, job placement services, all that. I went through the motions. But did anyone actually help you? Ethan's expression darkened. People tried. I wasn't good at accepting it. Why not? Because accepting help meant admitting I needed it. And I spent 12 years being the guy who didn't need anything, who could handle whatever got thrown at him. He paused. Hard to turn that off. Is that what happened with Lily's mother? The question was too personal, Victoria realized immediately. She'd crossed another line, but Ethan didn't shut down this time. He just looked tired. Sarah left because I couldn't be what she needed, he said quietly. She wanted the version of me that existed before I deployed. The guy who laughed easy and didn't wake up at 3 a.m. checking the locks. I tried to be that guy again, but he trailed off. But you couldn't. No. And she couldn't live with who I'd become. Can't blame her for that. I can, Victoria said. She left a child. She sends money every month. Not much, but it's something, and she calls on Lily's birthday. Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. Could be worse. Victoria thought about her own parents. Her mother had died when she was 12. Cancer, fast, and brutal. Her father had thrown himself into work afterward, building the company bigger, stronger, more successful, teaching Victoria to do the same. She'd never questioned whether that was the right response, whether maybe there were other ways to process grief besides burying it under spreadsheets and quarterly reports. My father had a heart attack 6 years ago, Victoria heard herself say. He survived, but it changed him, made him want to retire, hand everything over to me. I took over as CEO 3 months later. That what you wanted? I thought so. It's what I'd been training for my whole life. Victoria pulled the blanket a little tighter. But sometimes I wonder if I took the job because I wanted it, or because I was scared of disappointing him. Could be both. Yeah, could be. They sat with that for a while. The plane engines hummed steadily, a white noise that made the rest of the world feel very far away. Victoria's eyes were getting heavy again. The warmth, the exhaustion, the strange intimacy of this conversation, it was all pulling her towards sleep. She fought it, not wanting to miss whatever came next. Tell me about the security work, she said, trying to stay alert. What exactly do you do? Ethan seemed grateful for the shift to safer territory. Depends on the client. Sometimes it's installing systems, cameras, alarms, access control. Sometimes it's consulting, helping companies figure out their vulnerabilities. I did some executive protection for a while, but that dried up. Why? Because the kind of people who need bodyguards want someone who looks the part. 6'4", 240 pounds, neck like a tree trunk. Ethan gestured to himself. I'm 5'11" and 170, not exactly intimidating. Victoria almost laughed. You're more dangerous than any of those men. Maybe, but perception matters in that business, and I don't exactly have the credentials to prove it anymore. What do you mean? Ethan's expression went carefully blank. My service record is sealed. Medical discharge, classified operations, the whole thing. So when potential clients do background checks, all they see is a guy who was in the Army for 12 years and got kicked out for medical reasons. No details, no decorations, nothing. Can't you appeal that? Get the records unsealed? Could try. Would take years and there's no guarantee. He shrugged. Easier to just start over. But it wasn't easier, Victoria realized. It was just the only option available, and Ethan was too proud or too stubborn to complain about the unfairness of it. The general knew you, she said. Torres. He could vouch for you. Maybe, but I'm not going to ask him to. Why not? Because using my service to get ahead feels wrong, like I'm trading on something that belonged to all of us, not just me. Victoria wanted to shake him. This man had earned every bit of recognition he'd received, and he was refusing to use it out of some misguided sense of honor. But she also understood it, because it was the same reason she'd never mentioned her father's company in business school, the same reason she'd used her mother's maiden name on her first few job applications, the need to prove she could do it herself, without trading on someone else's legacy. Pride was a strange thing. It kept you honest, but it also kept you alone. What if I could get you an interview? Victoria said carefully. Not charity, not a handout, just a legitimate interview for a legitimate position. Would you at least consider it? Ethan's eyes narrowed. With your company? With one of our security contractors. We use external firms for facility security, executive protection, cybersecurity consulting. I could make an introduction. What happens after that is up to you. And you do this because you're qualified. Because you need work. Because... Victoria stopped, then decided to just say it. Because I've spent 6 years running a company, and I've never once thought about the people who install our security systems. Never wondered if they were getting paid enough, or if they had families, or if they were one paycheck away from losing everything. I just cared that the cameras worked and the doors locked. Her voice had gotten tight. She took a breath. You made me think about that, she continued. You and Lily, you made me think about a lot of things I've been avoiding. Ethan studied her for a long moment. This because you feel guilty about being rich? No, it's because I feel guilty about not caring. The distinction seemed to matter to him. Some of the suspicion left his face. One interview, he said finally. No promises, no guarantees, just a fair shot. That's all I'm offering. And if I don't get the job, then you don't get the job. I'm not going to rig it for you. Ethan almost smiled. Fair enough. They shook hands under the blanket, an oddly formal gesture that somehow felt necessary. Victoria felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. A working man's hands. When was the last time she'd shaken hands with someone who actually worked for a living? The thought was uncomfortable, but she didn't push it away. She was done pushing uncomfortable thoughts away. Lily woke up suddenly, her eyes wide and confused. Daddy, I have to go to the bathroom. Ethan sighed. Okay, kiddo, let's go. He carefully disentangled himself from the blanket and lifted Lily out of his lap. She was still half asleep, leaning against him as he guided her toward the back of the plane. Victoria was left alone in the seat, the blanket still draped across her lap. Without their body heat, the cold started creeping back in almost immediately. She pulled the blanket tighter and looked out the window. Dawn was starting to break somewhere to the east, painting the horizon in shades of deep purple and gold. In another hour, maybe less, they'd be landing. And then what? Victoria would go back to being Victoria Vance, CEO, billionaire, ice queen. She'd turn her phone back on and deal with the fallout from tonight. She'd sit through meetings and conference calls and explain to the board why their leader had been photographed accepting charity from strangers. She'd rebuild the armor, piece by piece, until no one could see the cracks. But something had shifted, some fundamental understanding that she couldn't unlearn. She'd been cold tonight, truly, dangerously cold. And wealth hadn't protected her, status hadn't helped her. All the money in the world couldn't have warmed her the way this worn blanket had, the way human connection had. Across the aisle, General Torres caught her eye and nodded slightly. A gesture of respect, maybe, or just acknowledgement. Victoria nodded back. Excuse me, Ms. Vance? Victoria looked up. A young woman was standing in the aisle, maybe mid-20s, dressed in jeans and a college sweatshirt. She looked nervous. Yes? I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say... The woman paused, gathering courage. I work for one of your companies, the manufacturing plant in Ohio. Victoria's stomach dropped. Oh? Yeah, you closed it last year. I lost my job. The woman's voice was steady, but there was pain underneath. 300 of us lost our jobs. The cabin had gone quiet again, people listening. Victoria felt every eye on her. This was it. The reckoning she'd known was coming. The moment when someone called her out for all the decisions she'd made in boardrooms, far removed from the consequences. I'm sorry, she said quietly. It felt inadequate, but it was all she had. The young woman nodded slowly. I was angry for a long time. We all were. But then I saw the photos tonight. Saw you sitting there, cold and scared, just like anyone else. She paused. I just wanted to say that it helped. Seeing you be human, seeing you need help. Victoria didn't know what to say to that. I got a new job, the woman continued. It pays less, and the benefits aren't as good, but I'm managing. And I guess I just wanted you to know that we're all managing. Even when it's hard, even when people make decisions that hurt us. There was no malice in her voice, just truth. Thank you for telling me, Victoria managed. The woman nodded and went back to her seat. Victoria sat very still, feeling like she'd been punched in the chest. 300 jobs. 300 families affected by a decision she'd made over a conference call, justified with efficiency metrics and profit margins. She'd known the numbers, had reviewed the severance packages, the job placement assistance, all the things companies did to soften the blow. But she'd never thought about the woman in the college sweatshirt, never wondered if she'd found new work, or how she was managing, or whether she was angry. Never cared enough to wonder. Ethan returned with Lily, who immediately climbed back into his lap and burrowed under the blanket. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing Victoria's expression. "No," Victoria said honestly. "But it will be." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push. The sky outside was getting lighter, the darkness giving way to pale blue. Below them, Victoria could make out the coastline now, the irregular edge of Long Island, the sprawl of New York City beyond. Almost home. Almost time to face everything she'd been avoiding. "Daddy, look!" Lily pressed her face against the window. "You can see the buildings." "That's New York, kiddo." "Is that where Aunt Rachel lives?" "Yeah, and where we're going to stay for a while." "Will I like it there?" Ethan pulled her closer. "I think you will. There's parks and museums and more people than you've ever seen in your life." "Will I make friends?" "Definitely." Lily seemed satisfied with this. She turned to Victoria. "Will you be in New York too?" "I live here?" "Yes." "Will we see you again?" Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. She wanted to say yes, wanted to promise this little girl that they'd stay in touch, that tonight hadn't been just a random encounter that would fade into memory, but she didn't make promises she couldn't keep. "I don't know," she said gently, "but I hope so." Lily nodded, accepting this with the easy resilience of childhood. "Okay, but if we do see you again, you should come to our house. We can have tea parties. I'm really good at tea parties." Despite everything, Victoria smiled. "I bet you are." The plane began its descent, the pressure change making everyone's ears pop. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, collecting trash, checking seatbelts, preparing for landing. Ethan carefully folded the blanket and handed it back to Victoria. "You should keep it," she said. "Can't. It's not mine to give away." "What do you mean?" Ethan's expression shifted, becoming distant. "It belonged to my team leader, a guy named Martinez. He died in the same operation that got me discharged. His wife gave me the blanket at the funeral, said he would have wanted me to have it." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "I'm so sorry." "Me too." Ethan took the blanket and held it for a moment, his fingers tracing the frayed edges. "I don't usually share it, but Lily insisted, and—" He trailed off. "I'm honored you did," Victoria said quietly. And she meant it. This wasn't just a blanket. It was a memorial, a reminder, a connection to something sacred. And Ethan had wrapped it around a stranger because his daughter had asked him to. The landing gear descended with a heavy thunk. Through the windows, Victoria could see the runways of JFK approaching, the lights of the city beyond. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing in approximately 5 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and all devices are stowed." Victoria straightened in her seat, mentally preparing for what came next. The phone calls, the meetings, the damage control. But first, there was something she needed to do. She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Simple white stock, her name and title embossed in black. "Here," she said, handing it to Ethan. "My direct number is on the back. Call me on Monday. I'll set up that interview." Ethan took the card, studying it. Victoria Vance, Chief Executive Officer, Vance Industries. He looked up at her. "I didn't know the company name." "Does it matter?" "I guess not." He tucked the card into his wallet. "Thank you." "Don't thank me until you get the job." "Fair enough." The plane touched down smoothly, tires screeching against tarmac. Around them, passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to deplane. But Victoria stayed seated, watching as Ethan helped Lily into her coat, as he carefully folded the blanket and tucked it into his bag. These small, ordinary gestures that somehow felt profound. This man had saved her tonight. Not dramatically, not heroically, but simply. By sharing what little he had. By treating her like a human being instead of a problem to solve or a reputation to protect. And in doing so, he'd reminded her of something she'd forgotten: that wealth meant nothing without compassion, that success was hollow without connection, that all the power in the world couldn't keep you warm if you were alone. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began standing, pulling bags from overhead compartments. Ethan stood and offered his hand to help Victoria up. She took it, and for a brief moment they stood there in the aisle, the blanket folded between them, this strange night coming to an end. "Take care of yourself," Ethan said. "You too." Lily hugged Victoria's leg suddenly, fiercely. "Bye, Victoria. I hope you're never cold again." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back and smiled. "Bye, Lily. Thank you for sharing your blanket." "You're welcome." And then they were moving, swept up in the crowd of deplaning passengers. Victoria watched them go. The man with the folded blanket, the little girl holding his hand, until they disappeared into the jetway. She gathered her own belongings slowly, in no rush to face what waited beyond the gate. Her phone felt heavy in her bag, all those messages and demands waiting to explode the moment she turned it on. But for just a few more minutes, Victoria stayed in the quiet space between one world and the next, between who she'd been and who she might become. The cabin emptied around her until she was almost alone, just her and a flight attendant collecting forgotten items. "Ma'am?" the attendant said gently. "We need to prepare for the next flight." "Of course. I'm sorry." Victoria stood and made her way to the exit. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at the empty cabin. Row 23, where everything had changed. "Thank you for flying with us," the attendant said automatically. Victoria almost laughed, as if this had been just another flight, just another trip. She stepped into the jetway and walked toward the terminal, toward the chaos waiting for her. But she wasn't the same woman who'd boarded this plane in London. That woman had been cold. This one had been warmed, and that made all the difference. The terminal was chaos. Victoria stepped through the gate and was immediately hit by the noise. Announcements blaring over intercoms, children crying, the general din of thousands of people all trying to get somewhere else. JFK at 6 in the morning was its own special kind of hell. Her phone buzzed in her bag before she'd even turned it on. Then again, and again. She pulled it out and watched the screen light up with notification after notification. 63 missed calls, 147 text messages, emails flooding in so fast the number kept jumping. The first text was from Melissa, time-stamped at 11 p.m. the night before. "Ms. Vance, we have a situation. Please call me immediately." The texts got progressively more frantic after that. The photos are everywhere. "Board is calling emergency meeting. PR says we need statement ASAP." "Where are you?" Victoria should have felt panic, should have immediately gone into crisis management mode, making calls, issuing statements, controlling the narrative. Instead, she felt numb. She made her way through the terminal, pulling her carry-on behind her, phone clutched in her other hand. Around her, people rushed past, some recognizing her, doing double takes, whispering to their companions. A few pulled out their phones, adding to the documentation of her downfall. Let them look, Victoria thought. Let them talk. She was too tired to care. Baggage claim was packed. Victoria stood by the carousel, watching suitcases circle endlessly, and tried to return the most urgent calls. Her driver would be waiting outside, and she had a meeting with the board in 4 hours. Enough time to shower, change, and prepare a defense for decisions she wasn't sure she could defend anymore. "Victoria?" The voice made her turn. For a wild second, she thought it might be Ethan, that he'd somehow found her in this crowd. But it was Melissa, her assistant, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Melissa? What are you doing here?" "Your driver told me which flight you were on. I've been waiting since 5. Melissa's eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "We need to talk. Now." "The board meeting is in 3 hours, not 4. They moved it up. Everyone's already gathering." Melissa grabbed Victoria's arm and pulled her toward a quieter corner. "What happened on that plane?" "I was cold. Someone help me. That's it." "That's not it. The photos are everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, every major news outlet. Billionaire CEO reduced to begging. They're calling you weak, vulnerable, incompetent." "I was hypothermic, Melissa. What was I supposed to do? Not accept charity from some random passenger? Not let yourself be photographed looking?" Melissa struggled for words. looking human. The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. Is that really such a bad thing? For you? Yes. Melissa's voice rose, then dropped when people turned to stare. Your entire brand is built on being untouchable, unshakable, the woman who doesn't need anyone, and in one night, you destroyed that. Victoria wanted to argue, wanted to explain that maybe that brand had been the problem all along. But Melissa was still talking, pulling up articles on her phone, showing Victoria the damage in real time. Vance Industries stock drops 4% on CEO. Scandal is Victoria. Vance fit to lead? Sources say board. Considering leadership change. This is bad, Melissa said. This is really, really bad. Victoria's bag finally appeared on the carousel. She grabbed it, more for something to do with her hands than anything else. What does PR recommend? She asked. Damage control. Immediate statement emphasizing it was a medical emergency. You were traveling for business. It was an isolated incident that doesn't reflect on your leadership capabilities. And if I don't want to say that? Melissa stared at her. What? What if I don't want to minimize it? What if I just tell the truth? The truth is what's killing you right now. Victoria pulled her bag off the carousel and started walking toward the exit. Melissa followed, practically jogging to keep up. Victoria, listen to me. You built this company into what it is because you're ruthless, because you make hard decisions and don't apologize for them. If you start showing weakness now, I am weak, Melissa. Victoria stopped walking and turned to face her assistant. I'm human. I get cold, I get scared. I need help sometimes. Pretending otherwise hasn't made me stronger. It's just made me alone. Melissa looked genuinely frightened now. You're not thinking clearly. The stress, the flight, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Robert Vance. Her father. She answered. Hi, Dad. What the hell happened? Her father's voice was steel. No greeting, no preamble. I'm looking at photos of my daughter wrapped in a stranger's blanket like some kind of person who needed help and accepted it. Silence on the other end. Then carefully, Victoria, what's going on? I had a medical episode on the plane. My condition acted up and I was freezing. A passenger shared his blanket with me. That's the whole story. That's not the whole story. The whole story is that you gave away your first-class seat and put yourself in a position to be vulnerable. That's not like you. Maybe it should be. Another pause, longer this time. Victoria could hear her father breathing, processing. We need to talk, he said finally. In person. Today. I have a board meeting in 3 hours. I know. I'll be there. The call ended. Victoria looked at Melissa, who was watching her with mounting concern. Your father's right, Melissa said quietly. This isn't like you. Good, Victoria said. The old me was cold. She walked toward the exit, leaving Melissa standing by the baggage carousel, looking lost. Outside, the morning air was crisp and sharp. New York in early spring, still carrying the edge of winter. Victoria's driver spotted her immediately and pulled up to the curb. Ms. Vance, he said, opening the door. Welcome back. Thank you, James. She slid into the back seat, and the familiar smell of leather and cologne enveloped her. This was her world. Expensive cars, efficient service, everything controlled and pristine. It felt like a costume she wasn't sure fit anymore. James pulled into traffic, navigating the chaos of airport departures with practiced ease. Victoria watched the city slide past her window. Billboards, buildings, people starting their morning commutes. Somewhere in this sprawl, Ethan and Lily were headed to his sister's apartment in Brooklyn. Starting over with nothing but a duffel bag and hope. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos that had been taken on the plane. Someone had gotten a shot of her sleeping, her head tilted toward Ethan's shoulder, the blanket pulled up to her chin. She looked small in that photo, vulnerable, human. The comments were vicious, pathetic. She'd rather beg than pay for a blanket. This is what happens when women try to lead. They crack. Bet she's faking it for sympathy. Probably has a PR team behind this. But scattered among the cruelty were other voices, actually kind of beautiful, that a stranger helped her. We're all human. Even billionaires get cold. The guy who gave her the blanket is a hero, literally. Look up Ethan Cole. That last comment had spawned its own thread. People had identified Ethan, found his service record, or what little of it was public, and were now debating whether he was the real hero of the story or just another opportunist. Victoria closed her eyes. She'd wanted to help him, and instead she might have made his life worse. The attention, the speculation, the invasion of privacy. She needed to fix this. "James," she said, "change of plans. Take me to the office." "You're not going home first?" "No, I need to get to work." The drive to Midtown took 40 minutes in morning traffic. Victoria used the time to read through the most urgent emails, formulate responses, and prepare for battle. Because that's what the board meeting would be. A battle for her position, her reputation, her right to lead. The Vance Industries building rose 40 stories above Fifth Avenue, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Victoria had moved the headquarters here 5 years ago, right after taking over as CEO, a statement of power and permanence. Now, walking through the lobby, she felt the weight of that statement pressing down on her. "Ms. Vance." The security guard at the desk nodded respectfully. "Good morning." "Morning, Carl." She wondered if Carl had seen the photos, if he'd read the comments, if he was judging her right now, finding her weak. But Carl just smiled, the same smile he gave her every morning, and buzzed her through. The elevator ride to the executive floor was mercifully empty. Victoria caught her reflection in the polished doors, rumpled clothes, hair a mess, the kind of appearance she never would have allowed before. She looked like someone who'd been up all night on a plane, someone who'd been cold and scared and desperately grateful for a stranger's kindness. The executive floor was already bustling despite the early hour. People looked up as she passed, their expressions carefully neutral. No one said anything, but Victoria felt the judgment in their silence. Her office was at the end of the hall, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She closed the door behind her and stood for a moment, just breathing. This was her kingdom. The empire she'd built, the legacy she was supposed to protect. But looking at it now, all she felt was tired. A knock on the door made her turn. "Come in." It was David Chen, her CFO, and the closest thing she had to a friend on the board. "Victoria," he said, closing the door behind him. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I don't know." David crossed to her desk and leaned against it. He was 52, brilliant with numbers, and had been with the company since before Victoria took over. If anyone would give her a straight answer, it was him. "The board is worried," he said carefully. "I know. They're questioning your judgment. Some of them are talking about a vote of no confidence." Victoria's stomach dropped. "Already?" "You have to understand, Victoria. Your leadership style has always been about strength, decisiveness, never showing weakness. These photos contradict everything you've built your reputation on. So I'm being punished for being human. You're being held to the standard you set for yourself." David's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't spend 6 years projecting invincibility and then expect people to be okay when the image cracks." "What if I don't want to project that anymore?" David studied her face. "Then you need to decide what you do want. And you need to decide fast, because that board meeting starts in 2 hours and they're going to ask you some very hard questions." "Like what?" "Like whether you're still capable of making the hard decisions this company needs. Like whether personal struggles are affecting your professional judgment. Like whether maybe it's time for new leadership." The words hit like physical blows. Victoria had known this was coming, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real. "Who are they thinking of?" she asked. "Marcus Hoffman is the favorite. He's been positioning himself for months." Marcus. Of course. Her VP of operations. Ambitious and ruthless. Everything the board wanted in a leader. Everything Victoria used to be. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think you should ask yourself why you gave away that first-class seat. Because that's not a decision the Victoria Vance I know would have made." "The Victoria Vance you know would have let a young mother struggle while she sat in comfort," Victoria said. "Is that really who you want running this company?" "I want someone who makes decisions based on logic, not emotion." "And if emotion is part of being human, part of being a good leader?" David sighed. Then you're going to have to convince 11 board members that you're right and they're wrong. In 2 hours. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad you helped that woman. And I'm glad someone helped you. It took courage to accept that blanket. Courage or desperation? Maybe both. After David left, Victoria sat at her desk and pulled up the photos again. This time she looked past the comments, past the mockery, and really examined the images. There was the moment Ethan had first offered the blanket, his daughter watching with hopeful eyes. The moment Victoria had accepted it, her hands shaking. The three of them huddled together, sharing warmth. And in every photo, despite the fear and the cold and the vulnerability, there was something else. Dignity. Not the manufactured dignity of power and position. Real dignity. The kind that came from treating each other like human beings, regardless of wealth or status or circumstance. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Ethan Cole. We made it to my sister's place. Lily wanted me to tell you she's thinking about you. Hope your day goes better than the flight. Victoria stared at the message. He didn't know about the board meeting, the crisis, the fight for her job. He was just checking in because his daughter cared. She typed back, Thank you. Tell Lily I'm thinking about her too. I meant what I said about the interview. I'll call you Monday. The response came quickly. Appreciate it. But if it's going to cause you problems, don't worry about it. We'll figure something out. Victoria smiled despite herself. Even now, even after everything, he was trying to protect her, refusing to be a burden. It won't cause problems, she typed. And even if it did, I'd still do it. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The next 90 minutes passed in a blur of preparation. Victoria showered in the executive washroom, changed into the spare suit she kept in her office, and reviewed every financial report, every metric, every piece of data that could support her position. By the time she walked into the boardroom, she looked like the Victoria Vance they expected, polished, professional, in control. But inside, she felt different. The 11 board members were already seated around the long conference table. Marcus Hoffman sat at the far end, looking confident, too confident. At the head of the table sat Robert Vance, her father. His expression was unreadable. Good morning, Victoria said, taking her seat. Good morning, Victoria. Her father's voice was formal, careful. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Of course. I think we all know why we're here, Robert continued. Recent events have raised some concerns about leadership and judgment. We thought it best to address them directly. Victoria nodded, waiting. It was Marcus who spoke first. Victoria, we've all seen the photos from your flight. I think we can agree they present a troubling image of instability and poor decision-making. Do you? Victoria kept her voice level. Because from where I'm sitting, they present an image of a human being dealing with a medical emergency and accepting help from a kind stranger. A stranger you're now planning to give a job to, Marcus shot back. According to your assistant, you've promised him an interview with our security contractors. That's nepotism at best, corruption at worst. I promised him a fair interview, nothing more. And I did it because he's qualified, not because I owe him. You owe him your dignity, another board member chimed in. A woman named Patricia Hughes. He saved you from humiliation. No, Victoria said firmly. He saved me from hypothermia. The humiliation came from people like you who decided that accepting help made me weak. The room went silent. Robert leaned forward. Victoria, I think what the board is trying to understand is whether this incident represents a one-time lapse in judgment or a pattern of behavior that could affect your ability to lead. It represents growth, Victoria said. It represents the realization that the way I've been leading, the way we've all been leading, might be missing something fundamental. And what's that? Marcus asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Humanity. Victoria stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. 6 years ago, you appointed me CEO because I was ruthless, because I could make hard decisions without emotion, because I was willing to close factories, cut jobs, maximize profits at any cost. She turned back to face them. And I did all of those things. I did them well. Our stock price tripled. Our profit margins increased by 40%. By every metric that matters to this board, I succeeded. So what's the problem? Patricia asked. The problem is that I met someone last night who lost their job because of one of my decisions. A young woman who had to start over because I chose efficiency over empathy, and she thanked me. Thanked you? Marcus looked confused. She thanked me for being human, for showing weakness, because it reminded her that we're all struggling, we're all vulnerable, and maybe that's not something to hide. Victoria walked back to the table and placed her hands on its surface, looking each board member in the eye. I gave away my first-class seat to a mother who needed it more than I did. I accepted help from a stranger because I was dying and pride would have killed me. I promised a decorated veteran a fair shot at a job because he's qualified and deserving. And if you think any of those decisions make me weak, then maybe I'm not the right person to lead this company. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert Vance sat very still, his expression impossible to read. Marcus looked triumphant, like he'd already won. The other board members exchanged glances, uncertain. Finally, Robert spoke. Victoria, could you give us the room? She nodded and walked out, her heart pounding. In the hallway, Melissa was waiting, looking terrified. How bad? She whispered. I don't know, Victoria admitted, but I said what I needed to say. They waited. 10 minutes, 20, 45. Victoria's phone buzzed. Another text from Ethan. Lily wanted me to send you this. It was a photo of a crayon drawing, stick figures under what appeared to be a rainbow. 3 figures labeled Daddy, Lily, and Victoria. In Lily's world, they were already friends. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. The boardroom door opened. David stepped out, his expression carefully neutral. They want you back in. Victoria walked back into the room, steeling herself. Robert stood at the head of the table. We've discussed the situation, he said, and we've reached a decision. Victoria waited, her hands clenched at her sides. The board has voted, Robert continued, 8-3 in favor of... The pause felt like an eternity. In favor of maintaining current leadership, with conditions. Victoria let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. What conditions? We want you to take 2 weeks personal leave, effective immediately. During that time, you'll work with our PR team to address the public perception issues. When you return, we'll expect a comprehensive plan for how you intend to balance the company's financial goals with these new humanitarian concerns. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss either. I accept, Victoria said. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake, he said. You're rewarding weakness. No, Robert said quietly. We're recognizing that strength comes in many forms. Victoria, you're dismissed. She walked out of the boardroom in a daze. 2 weeks leave, time to figure out who she wanted to be. Time to fix the damage, or embrace it, or somehow find a path between the two. Melissa was still in the hallway, practically vibrating with anxiety. Well, I still have my job. Barely. That's good, right? I think so. Victoria pulled out her phone and called the number Ethan had texted from. He answered on the second ring. Hello? Ethan, it's Victoria. Are you free tomorrow? I'd like to meet with you and Lily, somewhere outside the office, maybe coffee or lunch. There was a pause, then carefully, is this about the interview? No, this is about thank you, properly. Another pause. Then she heard Lily's voice in the background. Is that Victoria? Can we have a tea party? Ethan laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. How do you feel about tea parties? He asked Victoria. I think I could learn to love them. Then we'll see you tomorrow. After they hung up, Victoria stood in the hallway and looked at the crayon drawing Lily had sent. 3 stick figures under a rainbow. In a child's eyes, it really was that simple. And maybe, Victoria thought, it should be. Victoria stood outside a small cafe in Brooklyn the next afternoon, feeling more nervous than she had during the board meeting. Through the window, she could see Ethan and Lily already seated at a corner table. Lily was coloring on a paper placemat, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Ethan was watching her with that quiet attentiveness Victoria was beginning to recognize as his default state. She'd spent an hour that morning deciding what to wear. Too formal would seem condescending. Too casual would seem like she was trying too hard. She'd settled on jeans and a sweater, clothes she owned but rarely wore, pulled from the back of a closet that mostly held business suits. Taking a breath, she pushed open the door. Lily spotted her first and squealed loud enough to make half the cafe turn. "Victoria, you came!" The little girl launched herself out of her chair and ran over, wrapping her arms around Victoria's waist. The gesture was so spontaneous, so completely without reservation, that Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. "Hi, Lily," she managed, her hand coming to rest on the child's head. "Of course I came." Ethan stood as she approached, offering a handshake that felt oddly formal after everything they'd been through. But Victoria took it, feeling the same calloused grip, the same steady strength. "Thanks for meeting us," he said. "Thank you for agreeing to come." They sat down, and an awkward silence settled over the table. Lily, oblivious to the tension, pushed her drawing across to Victoria. "Look what I made. It's us on the airplane, but I added stars because airplanes fly near stars." Victoria studied the crayon drawing. 3 stick figures under a night sky filled with oversized stars. One figure had yellow hair, her. The smallest one had a big smile. The tallest one had his arms around both of them. "It's beautiful," Victoria said, and meant it. "You can keep it if you want." "I'd love that." A waitress came by and they ordered coffee for the adults, hot chocolate for Lily, and a plate of cookies that Lily immediately began negotiating for. "Just 2, Ethan said firmly. 3? 2. What if I eat really slow? Then you'll eat 2 cookies really slow." Lily sighed dramatically but accepted her fate. Victoria watched the exchange with fascination. This was parenting, the constant negotiation, the gentle firmness, the love underneath every interaction. Once the waitress left, Victoria pulled out a folder she'd brought with her. "I wanted to give you this," she said, sliding it across to Ethan. "It's information about the interview. The security contractor is called Sentinel Group. They handle all our corporate security, facility protection, cybersecurity consulting, executive protection details. The CEO's name is Richard Morrison. He's expecting your call on Monday." Ethan opened the folder, scanning the contents. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes, I did. I promised you a fair shot, and I meant it." "What did you tell him about me?" "That you're former military with extensive security experience, that I thought you'd be a good fit. The rest is up to you." Ethan nodded slowly, then looked up at her. "I saw the news. About the board meeting." Victoria's stomach tightened. "Of course you did. It's everywhere." "They said you almost lost your job." "Almost, but I didn't." "Because of what happened on the plane?" "Partly, but also because I realized I'd been running that company the wrong way, treating people like numbers instead of—" She stopped, glancing at Lily, who was happily dunking a cookie in her hot chocolate. "Instead of people. And now? Now I have 2 weeks to figure out how to fix that." Lily looked up, her mouth ringed with chocolate. "Are you in trouble?" "Sort of," Victoria admitted, "but it's the kind of trouble that might make things better." "That's good then." Lily said it with such simple certainty that both adults smiled. The conversation drifted to easier topics. Ethan's sister Rachel, who worked as a nurse at Mount Sinai, the tiny apartment they were staying in. Lily's excitement about starting school in a new city. "She's nervous," Ethan said quietly. "New place, new people. She doesn't show it, but I can tell." "I'm not nervous," Lily protested. "Sure, kiddo. I'm not. I just think maybe the other kids won't like me." Victoria leaned forward. "Want to know a secret? I was terrified on my first day of school." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? Really? I was so scared I hid in the bathroom for an hour." "What happened?" "My teacher found me and asked why I was hiding. I told her everyone would think I was weird. And she said, 'Good. Weird is interesting. Normal is boring.'" Lily seemed to consider this. Was she right? She was. The weird kids always turned out to be the most interesting ones. "Then I'm going to be super interesting," Lily declared, and went back to her cookies with renewed confidence. Ethan caught Victoria's eye across the table, and something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe. Or just recognition that they were both doing their best with imperfect tools. After they finished eating, Lily announced she needed to use the bathroom. Ethan started to get up, but Victoria stopped him. "I'll take her," she said, "if that's okay." Ethan looked surprised but nodded. "Sure. Thanks." In the bathroom, Lily chattered nonstop while washing her hands. I really like you, Victoria. Daddy likes you too. I can tell. Oh? Victoria felt her face warm. How can you tell? He smiles different when you're around. Not his regular smile, his special smile. I didn't know there was a difference. There is. His regular smile is like this. Lily demonstrated a small, polite expression. But his special smile is like this. She broke into a wide, genuine grin. Victoria handed her a paper towel, trying not to read too much into a 6-year-old's observations. What about you? She asked. Do you smile different around people you like? Nope, I smile the same at everyone. Daddy says I smile too much. I don't think you can smile too much. That's what I said. When they returned to the table, Ethan was on his phone, his expression serious. He looked up as they approached. Everything okay? Victoria asked. Yeah, just... He hesitated. That was General Torres. From the plane. He saw the news coverage and wanted to check in. That was kind of him. He also offered to write me a letter of recommendation for job applications. Ethan's tone was careful, like he wasn't sure how to feel about this. Said he's been thinking about what happened on the flight, about how people treated both of us. Made him want to help. Are you going to accept? I don't know. Feels like cheating somehow. It's not cheating, Ethan. It's using resources available to you. There's a difference. Is there? Victoria thought about her own advantages. The father who'd built an empire. The education money could buy. The doors that opened because of her last name. I used to think accepting help meant you were weak, she said slowly. But I'm starting to understand that refusing help when you need it is just another form of pride. And pride doesn't keep you warm. Ethan's expression softened. No, I guess it doesn't. They paid the check and walked out into the crisp afternoon. The street was busy with weekend shoppers, couples pushing strollers, people living their lives without crisis or consequence. Where are you parked? Ethan asked. I didn't drive. I took the subway. He looked at her like she'd announced she'd flown here on a magic carpet. You took the subway? Is that so surprising? You're Victoria Vance. Don't you have like 17 cars and a driver named James? I do have a driver named James, but I wanted to... She stopped, not sure how to explain. I wanted to see the city the way normal people see it. And how was it? Loud, crowded, kind of wonderful, actually. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve. Can Victoria come see Aunt Rachel's apartment, please? Ethan looked uncertain. I don't think... I'd love to, Victoria said, surprising herself. If it's not an imposition. It's really small. And kind of a mess. Rachel works night shifts, so I don't care about any of that. So they walked. 15 minutes through Brooklyn streets, Lily skipping ahead while the adults followed at a slower pace. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she'd walked anywhere without a destination, without a schedule, without purpose beyond the simple act of moving through the world. The apartment building was old, 6 stories of weathered brick, with a fire escape zigzagging down the front. They climbed 3 flights of stairs, and Ethan unlocked a door that opened into a space that might have been 400 square feet, generously measured. This is it, he said, almost apologetically. The apartment was tiny but clean. A pull-out couch dominated the living area. Lily's coloring books were spread across a coffee table that had seen better decades. Through an open door, Victoria could see a small bedroom where Rachel presumably slept when she wasn't working. You're staying on the couch? Victoria asked. Lily gets the couch. I'm on the floor. Ethan, it's fine. I've slept in worse places. Lily had already run to a corner where her stuffed animals were arranged in what appeared to be a very serious tea party. Victoria, come meet everyone! For the next 20 minutes, Victoria sat cross-legged on the floor and was introduced to Mr. Bear, Princess Whiskers, and a dinosaur named Susan. She drank imaginary tea from a plastic cup and ate invisible cookies, while Lily narrated an elaborate story about their adventures. Ethan watched from the couch, and Victoria caught him smiling. Not his regular smile, but the special one Lily had described. Eventually, Lily's energy began to wane. The night before's flight and the morning's excitement were catching up to her. She climbed into her father's lap and yawned. I think someone needs a nap, Ethan said gently. I'm not tired, Lily protested, her eyes already closing. Sure you're not, but within minutes she was asleep. Her small body curled against Ethan's chest. He adjusted his position carefully, settling her more comfortably, and then just sat there, holding his daughter while she slept. Victoria felt like she was witnessing something sacred. "I should probably go," she whispered. "Let you both rest." "Wait." Ethan's voice was quiet but urgent. "There's something I need to tell you about the plane, about why I was really there." Victoria settled back into her seat on the floor, waiting. "I lied," Ethan said, "when I said I had job interviews lined up. I had one interview, and it was a maybe at best. The truth is, I sold almost everything I owned to afford those plane tickets. The bank took my house 3 months ago. I've been staying in a motel, working odd jobs, trying to keep things together for Lily." He looked down at his sleeping daughter, his voice thick. "I was bringing her to Rachel's because I was out of options, out of money, out of ideas, out of pride. The flight was the last chance. If this didn't work—" He stopped, unable to finish the thought. Victoria's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what that blanket meant. It wasn't just a blanket. It was the last thing I had from my old life, from when I was someone who mattered. And I gave it to you because my daughter asked me to, but also because—" He met her eyes. "Because you look the way I feel every single day, lost, cold, desperate." Tears were sliding down Victoria's cheeks now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For not seeing it sooner. For building a world where people like you fall through the cracks. For—" Her voice broke. "For everything." Ethan shifted Lily slightly and reached down with his free hand, offering it to Victoria. She took it, and they sat there in that tiny apartment, connected by more than just touch. "I have to tell you something, too," Victoria said, "about my father, about why I gave away that first-class seat." She'd never told anyone this story, never put it into words. But here, in this moment, it felt necessary. 6 years ago, when my father had his heart attack, I was in Tokyo closing a deal. I got the call that he'd collapsed, that he was in surgery, that I needed to come home immediately. But I stayed. I finished the negotiations, signed the contracts, and flew home 18 hours later. Victoria's hand tightened on Ethan's. By the time I got to the hospital, he was stable but devastated. Not because of the heart attack, but because his daughter had chosen business over him. He never said it, but I saw it in his eyes. The disappointment, the hurt. "Victoria, when I saw that mother at the airport, overwhelmed, desperate, trying to hold everything together, I saw myself, or what I should have been. Someone who puts people before profit. So I gave her my seat because maybe, somewhere, someone did the same for my father when I wasn't there." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Did it help? Giving away the seat?" "I don't know, but it felt like the right thing to do. For once." They sat in silence, Lily breathing softly between them, the afternoon light slanting through the window. Finally, Ethan spoke. "That interview you set up, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to use Torres's letter of recommendation. Because you're right, refusing help isn't strength, it's just another way of being alone." "Good," Victoria said, "and I'm going to use these 2 weeks to figure out how to run a company that actually gives a damn about the people who work for it. Because you're right, too, numbers don't tell the whole story." "Think the board will let you?" "I don't know, but I have to try." Lily stirred, mumbling something about tea parties, then settled back into sleep. Victoria's phone buzzed, a text from her father. "We need to talk. Dinner tonight?" "My place." She stared at the message, her stomach nodding. Robert Vance didn't do casual dinners. This was going to be a reckoning. "I have to go," she said, standing carefully. "My father wants to see me." "Good luck." "I'm going to need it." At the door, Victoria paused and turned back. "Ethan, thank you. For the blanket, for your daughter, for reminding me what actually matters. Thank you for not being what everyone said you were." "What did they say I was?" "Cold." Victoria smiled. "I was, for a long time, but I'm working on it." She left the apartment and made her way back through Brooklyn, her mind already spinning through what she'd say to her father. The subway ride to Manhattan gave her time to prepare, to rehearse arguments and defenses and justifications. But when she walked into her father's penthouse that evening, all her preparation evaporated. Robert Vance was sitting in his study, looking older than she remembered. The heart attack had aged him, but this was different. He looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Hi, Dad." "Victoria, sit down." She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where she'd sat as a child while he explained the business, taught her about markets and margins and the cost of success. "I've been thinking about what happened on that plane," Robert began. "About the choices you made, the seat, the blanket, all of it." Victoria braced herself for the lecture, but instead, her father did something she'd never seen him do before. He pulled out a photograph from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. It was old, the colors faded. A young man in a business suit stood next to another man in worn work clothes. Both were smiling. "Who is this?" Victoria asked. "That's me," Robert said, pointing to the younger version of himself. "And that's James Martinez. He was a janitor at my first office building. Worked nights, saved every penny he could to send his kids to college." Victoria looked closer at the photograph, recognition dawning. "Martinez? As in the man whose blanket was on that plane?" "Yes." Robert's voice was soft. "James Martinez saved my life 28 years ago." The room seemed to tilt. "What?" "I was working late one night. Everyone else had gone home except James, who was cleaning the building. I had a massive heart attack, different from the one 6 years ago, but just as serious. I collapsed in my office, and James found me. He called 911, performed CPR, stayed with me until the paramedics arrived." Robert's eyes were distant, remembering. "The doctor said if he'd found me even 5 minutes later, I would have died. But James saved me. And when I tried to thank him, tried to give him money or a promotion or anything, he refused. Said he was just doing what anyone would do." Victoria's mind was reeling. Did Ethan know? I doubt it. James died in Afghanistan 15 years ago. He'd enlisted late in life, wanting to serve his country. His son, Marcus Martinez, joined up too. Same unit, actually. Robert paused. Marcus Martinez was the team leader who died in the operation that got Ethan Cole discharged. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture Victoria couldn't fully comprehend. "Marcus gave Ethan his father's blanket before he died," Robert continued. "Told him it had saved his father's life once, hoped it would do the same for someone else. And 28 years later, it did. It saved my daughter." Victoria couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "So when you ask me if giving away that seat was the right decision," Robert said, "or if accepting that blanket made you weak, I want you to understand something. That blanket has been saving lives for 3 decades. James saved me. Ethan saved 17 soldiers. You saved a mother who needed help. And all of you did it because you saw someone suffering and decided to do something about it." Tears were streaming down Victoria's face now. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for staying in Tokyo, for choosing the deal over you, for—" "Stop." Robert's voice was firm but kind. "I never blamed you for that, Victoria. I blame myself for teaching you that business came first, for making you think that success meant sacrifice." He stood and walked around the desk, pulling his daughter into a hug she didn't know she'd needed for 6 years. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not for the company, not for the profits, for being human enough to accept help when you needed it, for having the courage to change." They stood there for a long time, father and daughter, letting years of unspoken hurt finally have space to heal. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. "The board wants me to come back with a plan," she said, "a way to balance profits with humanity. I don't know if it's possible." "It is, but it won't be easy, and it won't make everyone happy." "Will it make you happy?" Robert smiled. "I'd rather have a daughter who cares than a CEO who doesn't. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Victoria spent the next week working on her plan. She met with the employees who'd lost their jobs when she'd closed the Ohio factory, listening to their stories, understanding the real cost of her decisions. She visited other facilities, talked to workers on the floor, learned names and faces instead of just reviewing productivity reports. And on Monday, she called Ethan. "How did the interview go?" she asked. "I got the job." Victoria felt genuine joy flood through her. "That's wonderful." "It's not what I expected," Ethan admitted. "Morrison offered me a position designing security systems, not installing them. Said someone with my background and experience was wasted in the field. The pay is... He paused. It's more than I've made in 5 years. Victoria, I can afford an actual apartment. I can give Lily a real home. You deserve it. I keep thinking there's going to be a catch, that someone's going to realize they made a mistake. The only mistake would be not hiring you in the first place. She could hear the smile in his voice. Lily wants to know if you'll come to dinner this week, once we're settled in the new place. I'd love to. The second week of her leave, Victoria did something she'd never done before. She volunteered at a homeless shelter in Manhattan, serving meals, listening to stories, understanding that the distance between success and failure was often just one bad break, one missed opportunity, one moment of pride preventing someone from asking for help. When she returned to the office 2 weeks later, she walked into the board meeting with a 90-page proposal that detailed a new approach to corporate responsibility. It included job retraining programs, better severance packages, profit-sharing initiatives, and a commitment to evaluating the human cost of every major decision. Marcus Hoffman was the first to object. This will cost millions, he said. It'll destroy our profit margins. In the short term, yes, Victoria acknowledged. In the long term, we'll have a more loyal workforce, better public perception, and a company culture that actually retains talent instead of burning through it. This is idealistic nonsense, Patricia Hughes said. We're a business, not a charity. We're both, Victoria countered, or we should be. We can make money and treat people with dignity. They're not mutually exclusive. The debate lasted 3 hours. Some board members supported her, others didn't. Marcus threatened to resign. Patricia demanded a vote. In the end, it came down to Robert Vance. I've been thinking about legacy, he said quietly, about what we leave behind. For years, I thought it was the company, the buildings, the profits, the empire we built. But I was wrong. He looked at Victoria. Our legacy is how we treat people when they're vulnerable, how we respond when someone needs help, whether we choose humanity over efficiency. He paused. I support Victoria's plan, and I'm voting yes. The final vote was 7-4 in favor. It wasn't unanimous, it wasn't perfect, but it was a start. 3 months later, Victoria stood outside a small brownstone in Brooklyn. It was evening, and through the lit windows she could see Lily setting a table while Ethan moved around what appeared to be a kitchen. She'd brought flowers and wine, still uncertain about the etiquette of dinner with friends who'd once been strangers. The door opened before she could knock. Lily stood there in her dress covered in dinosaurs, beaming. You came! Of course I came. The apartment was small but bright, filled with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Ethan had cooked pasta, nothing fancy, but it smelled wonderful. Sorry it's not more impressive, he said. My cooking skills are pretty basic. It's perfect, Victoria said, and meant it. They ate dinner around a small table, Lily dominating the conversation with stories about her new school, her new friends, the teacher who let her draw dinosaurs during math time. After dinner, while Ethan did dishes and Lily played in her room, Victoria looked around the apartment. There were photos on the wall now. Lily blowing out birthday candles, Ethan at his new job, a professional shot of Rachel in her nurse's uniform. And in the corner, folded neatly on a shelf, was the blanket. I can't bring myself to put it away, Ethan said, noticing where she was looking. Lily uses it sometimes when she watches TV, says it makes her feel safe. It made me feel safe too, Victoria admitted. Yeah, me too. They stood there in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other at the worst possible moment and somehow made it better. I never thanked you properly, Victoria said. For everything. You did. Multiple times. No, I mean... She struggled for words. You changed my life, Ethan. That night on the plane, you showed me what I'd been missing, what I'd sacrificed in the name of success. And you did it without judgment, without expectation, just because your daughter asked you to share a blanket. Ethan shook his head. You changed your own life, Victoria. I just shared a blanket. You're the one who had the courage to look at yourself honestly and decide to be different. We both changed, Victoria said. That's what I'm trying to say. You opened yourself up to accepting help. I learned how to give it. We both got warmer. The simplicity of it made Ethan smile. That special smile Lily had described. Yeah, he said. I guess we did. Lily emerged from her room carrying a fresh drawing. This one showed the same three figures, but they weren't on a plane anymore. They were standing in front of a house with flowers and sunshine and a dog that Lily apparently hoped to convince her father to get. "This is us now," she announced. "We're happy." Victoria looked at the drawing, at the little girl who'd seen suffering and responded with compassion, at the father who'd given everything to protect her, at the representation of herself learning to be human again. "Yes," she said, pulling Lily into a hug. "We are." 6 months after the flight, Victoria was invited to speak at a business conference. The organizers wanted her to talk about her transformation, about the changes at Vance Industries, about balancing profit with purpose. She almost said no, almost retreated back into the privacy she'd always maintained. But then she thought about the young woman from the Ohio factory, about General Torres, about every person who'd been affected by her decisions over the years. So she said yes. Standing on stage in front of 500 executives, Victoria didn't tell them about metrics or strategies or business models. Instead, she told them about a freezing night on a plane, about a little girl who noticed suffering, about a man who gave away the only comfort he had. "I spent 6 years running a company based on the belief that strength meant never showing weakness," she said, "that success required sacrifice, that caring about people was a luxury leaders couldn't afford, and I was wrong about all of it." She paused, looking out at the audience. Real strength is accepting help when you need it. Real success is lifting others up, not stepping on them. And caring about people isn't a luxury, it's the whole point. She told them about the programs Vance Industries had implemented, about the workers they'd retrained, about the communities they'd invested in. She showed them the numbers, modest profit decreases in some quarters, but massive improvements in retention, productivity, and public perception. "Will this work for every company? I don't know," she admitted. "Will it make you as rich as you could be if you just focused on margins? Probably not, but it will make you part of something bigger than yourself. And some nights, when you can't sleep because you're cold and alone and wondering if any of this matters," her voice caught and she let it. "Some nights, that will be enough." The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people wanted to talk to her, to ask questions, to understand how to implement similar changes in their own companies. But the conversation that mattered most came from a young man who waited until everyone else had left. "Ms. Vance, I just wanted to say thank you. I was one of the workers at the Ohio factory. Lost my job when you closed it. I was angry for a long time." Victoria recognized him, not his face, but his story. "I'm sorry, I should have done better." "You did do better," he said. "The job retraining program you set up got me into a different field. I'm a technician now, making more than I did before. And my sister, she still works for one of your facilities, says it's a completely different place now, that people actually matter." He extended his hand and Victoria shook it. "Just wanted you to know that it made a difference," he said. "The changes, they're real." After he left, Victoria stood alone in the empty conference hall and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lily, who'd recently convinced her father to let her have limited phone privileges. "Daddy says, can you come to my school play next week? I'm a dinosaur. It's a very important role." Victoria smiled and typed back, "I wouldn't miss it for anything." The response came immediately. "Yay! Also, we got a dog. His name is Biscuit. You're going to love him." Victoria could imagine Ethan's face when he discovered his daughter had already named the dog they probably hadn't agreed to get yet. She walked out of the conference center into a crisp autumn evening. New York was beautiful this time of year. The trees in Central Park turning gold and red, the air carrying just enough chill to remind everyone that winter was coming. But Victoria wasn't afraid of the cold anymore. She'd learned that warmth didn't come from wealth or status or achievement. It came from connection, from compassion, from the simple act of sharing what you had with someone who needed it. It came from a worn military blanket and a child's kindness, and a man who understood that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was admit you needed help. Victoria pulled out her phone and called her father. "Hi, Dad." "Victoria, how did the speech go?" "Better than expected. I think some of them actually listened." "Good. That's good." A pause. "You free for dinner this week? Thursday work?" "Perfect." "And Victoria, I'm proud of you. I know I don't say it enough, but I am." "Thanks, Dad." That means a lot. After they hung up, Victoria walked through the city, past the corporate towers and luxury shops, and all the trappings of success she'd once thought mattered. And she felt grateful, not for what she had, but for what she'd learned to give away. Because that night on the plane, when she'd been coldest and most desperate, a stranger had wrapped her in warmth and asked for nothing in return. And in doing so, he'd taught her the most important lesson of all, that we're all just people, trying to stay warm in a cold world. And the only way to survive is to share the blanket. 2 years later, Victoria sat in her office reviewing quarterly reports. Vance Industries' profits were up 7%, not the explosive growth of years past, but steady, sustainable progress built on a foundation of treating people with dignity. The phone on her desk rang. "Ms. Vance, there's a General William Torres here to see you." "He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." Victoria smiled. "Send him in." Torres entered, looking exactly as he had on the plane, silver hair, military bearing, the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. "General Torres, this is a surprise. Ms. Vance, I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but I wanted to talk to you in person." "Please sit. Can I get you anything?" "No, thank you." Torres sat down, then pulled out a folder. "I've been following your work, the changes at Vance Industries, the programs you've implemented. It's impressive." "Thank you, sir. I'm here because I run a foundation. We support veterans transitioning to civilian life, helping them find employment, housing, mental health services. It's work I believe in, but we're not reaching enough people. We need to scale up." He slid the folder across the desk. "I'd like Vance Industries to partner with us, not just financially, though we'd welcome funding. I'm talking about a comprehensive program, hiring initiatives, training programs, ongoing support, making it a model other companies can follow." Victoria opened the folder and scanned the proposal. It was ambitious, expensive, and exactly the kind of project that would have terrified her 3 years ago. Now, it felt right. "I'll need to present this to the board," she said, "but I think we can make this work." Torres nodded. "There's one more thing. Ethan Cole has agreed to help design the program. He's become quite the advocate for veteran employment." "Has he?" "He's good at it. Speaks from experience, understands the challenges, knows how to connect with people. He's made a real difference." Pride swelled in Victoria's chest. "I'm glad to hear that." "We all are." Torres stood to leave, then paused. "That night on the plane, I was angry at how people treated both of you. Angry at the mockery, the cruelty. But looking at what's come from it, the changes you've made, the lives you've touched, I wonder if maybe it needed to happen exactly the way it did." "Maybe," Victoria agreed. "Cold nights show you who's willing to share their warmth." Torres smiled. "Indeed they do." After he left, Victoria sat at her desk and thought about blankets and kindness and the strange ways life connects people. Her phone buzzed. A group text from Ethan. Lily made the honor roll, taking her to celebrate. "You free for dinner?" Victoria looked at her calendar, packed with meetings, conference calls, obligations. She cleared it. "I'll be there," she typed. Wouldn't miss it. Because that was the thing about warmth. Once you found it, you had to protect it, nurture it, share it with others so it could spread. 3 years ago, Victoria Vance had been the coldest person she knew. Isolated by wealth, hardened by ambition, alone at the top of an empire built on efficiency. Now, sitting in that same office, she felt warm. Not because the temperature had changed, but because she'd learned what actually mattered. Not profit margins or stock prices or quarterly reports, just people. Connection. Compassion. The simple act of sharing a blanket with someone who needed it. And knowing that when your own cold night came, and it always did, someone would be there to share theirs with you. Outside her window, snow had started to fall. The first snow of winter, coating New York in white. Victoria watched it come down and smiled. She wasn't afraid of the cold anymore, because she'd learned that warmth wasn't something you hoarded. It was something you gave away. And somehow, impossibly, you always ended up with more.